How good are Elementalist traits in Guild Wars 2? This is the big question that we want to answer today in this video. This is a long one, so strap in, grab a cup of tea and enjoy the ride. The idea of this video, as for all the other videos in this series, check it out in the description down below, or check out my weapon analysis videos series, also in the description down below, is always that we analyze every single trait and go over it. I talk about my opinion, how it is used, when it's actually quite good, when you shouldn't choose it, so that you as a new player or as a veteran can decide, I want to build craft around this trait, I want to use it there, or just discuss with me if this trait needs to have some kind of rework. With that much said, as always, special shout out to all my dear supporters that help me keep the lights on. And now without much further ado, let's jump straight in and start with the first trait line. The first trait line is Fire. Fire is obviously a very offensive trait line, but also offers some quite good utility in there. So you get more power while you're tuned to fire. You will see there is always in Elementalist this kind of like, you get some stats with a specific trait line, fire, earth, water, air. And you get some specific cooldown reduction. And you get a specific effect when you swap into fire or the specific element. In fire, you get fire aura and deal some damage around you. This is quite interesting. Fire aura is one of the weakest auras in general, but it has some really good interactions with other traits. I will only cover the core traits in this video, but I will, of course, in a different video, I will cover all the elite spec traits as well. But this has great interactions, for example, on Catalyst, but also in PvE, it gives some nice damage buffs on some builds. It's actually really good. This is, again, like I mentioned, a trait that is in all element trait lines existing. This time it's for fire skills, gain reduced recharge 20%, and you deal more damage to burning foes. That's obviously quite good, because you have, like, aggressive with fire. So this is really potent already, because those traits give you really nice utility, because if you specialize in fire, you typically want to deal damage. If you specialize in water, you get a cooldown reduction for water, so typically you want to heal. So this minor traits here are actually already quite good, independent of what kind of specific other traits you choose, they're already quite good. So now let's talk about the first selectable ones. Burning Precision gives you more burning duration, and your critical hits gain a chance to inflict burning on a 5-second ICD in PvE. This is actually a very good trait, even for power builds, because you just deal some more damage. But in a Condi build, this is very strong. If you have high crit chance, you get a lot of burning out of that. And of course, you want to take it all the time for the duration increase. 20% more burning duration is huge, especially because a lot of Condi Elementalist builds, typically the main damaging condition, maybe only the damaging condition that you have, is burning. So it provides a lot of value from stats there. Then you have Conjurer, which is a trait that is actually quite weak, like never used in PvE and somewhat not useful in PvP either, because only when you pick up or an ally picks up a conjured weapon, which are not played in most game modes, then you get a fire aura. And like I said, fire aura is quite a weak aura. So I think this trait needs some kind of help. Maybe it is useful as a catalyst or as a Weaver in PvP, but that's about it. It's really, really niche. And then you have Burning Fire, which casts lesser cleansing fire when you have a number of conditions on you. 3 conditions to trigger, and then there's a 40-second ICD. So it's quite nice if you really desperately need a Condi cleanse, but it's very punishing, in my opinion, to take the straight 40-second ICD is really long. And in competitive modes, that's maybe sometimes the best choice. But I think in PvE, typically you really always want to choose this. Even it doesn't really matter. If you power Condi, whatever, this is just always, I would say, the best option. So definitely need some help, or it's not the craziest part of the trait line. We start getting into this now. Sunspots, so this trait here, the small trait here, inflicts burning and this radius increased, your condition damage is increased. Obviously a very important trait if you want to play Condi builds. You get a lot of Condi damage, you get more burning there, and you obviously want to swap in fire quite often, so makes sense. Then you have Smothering Auras, very, very strong trait in all game modes. It's very useful in a support to cleanse conditions from allies whenever you grant an aura, and when you transmute an aura, so when you use the flip over skill, then you actually get another cleanse, and the duration of fire auras actually increased. This is not that strong, but the cleansing part is really strong in all game modes. If you're a support, if you're a bruiser, whatever, it's really, really strong. And then you have Power Overwhelming. That means just that you get more power while you have a specific might, and you get even more while you are tuned to fire. So you get a lot of stats from this. Obviously a power damage trait makes sense. This is the Condi one, this is the power one, and this is, so to say, the utility one. Very good traits here all around. Then you have Persisting Flames, extremely strong damage buff, stacks up to 10% damage increase, which is really strong, and your fire fields last longer by weapon skills, that is. So overall, really good trait that you use in a lot of builds, even on Conny builds that sail with Viper, for example, because you actually get a nice damage increase. That is only for power damage. So if it doesn't specifically say all damage, it always means only power damage. Well, if it says Conny damage, it only means Conny damage. But this is still a very, very useful trait used in all DPS builds, and probably not that useful in competitive modes, but very strong nonetheless. And then you have Pyromancer's Puissance. This trait recently got buffed, so that means that you now get might whenever you are in combat and you are attuned to fire and use any skill, you get 1 stack of might. And it's a long-lasting stack, as you can see here. It's very strong, and when you swap out of the fire attunement or completing a fire overload and as a Tempest, you get Flame Expulsion, which deals a lot of damage around you and a lot of burning. So it's really nice and scales with your might. So really, really strong trait. Very strong in competitive modes or in a solo scenario. And other than that, in PvE, you typically don't really need it, but you can use it. And the last trait here got reworked again. That means that burning you inflict scales now off your power instead of your condition damage. That's a very fun interaction, very strong. 10% of your power is converted into burning damage. How does that work? You should not take this trait on Celestial or Condi builds. You take this trait if you are full power, like Berserker gear setup, and you convert all your power, so to say, into burning damage. So your burning is now a, so to say, power scaling condition, and therefore you can only take it on some really aggressive power DPS builds. And then you deal some burning damage on top of that, which is really, really strong, especially if you use it with burning precision, because that increases the burning duration baseline. So you don't have to invest into burning duration that much, and you deal still quite a lot of burning damage with this. So it's a really fun interaction. Of course, you have to drop it over persisting flames, but it's a really, really cool interaction, especially if you want to be the fire wizard and camp in fire and don't swap around. Next trait line that I want to go over is Air. Air trait line is, in my opinion, one of the underused trait lines in competitive modes, and in PvE it's, I don't know, it's a niche trait line that can be really strong or can be really weak depending on the build that you want to play. So passively you get more crit chance, that is really nice, 5%, it's good. And while attuned to air, you get more movement speed. Okay, quite okay. Then again, when you swap to air, you get a damage on the target that you have and inflict some vulnerability. Okay, yeah, it's not too bad, but also not that good. It's a fun interaction. If you have one trait that we will get here, then you can proc it quite consistently. And then you have Aeromancer's Training. Again, you get more recharge reduction on your air skills, weapon skills, and you get more ferocity. And while you're in air, you get even more ferocity. Just more stats, very nice. Then Sapphire Spoon, a very underused trait, sadly, was previously quite good, but now its Fury and Swiftness are so all abundant that it's really not that good anymore. So whenever you grant auras to you or to an ally, you grant Fury and Swiftness. It's good, but it's not really necessary in any game mode, especially because you have one with air, which grants super speed when you are tuned to air, which is really good. Super speed is really, really strong in competitive modes, but even in PvE, it can be really helpful just to get around. And then lastly, you have Ferocious Winds, really strong in power-based builds. Air is power favored and CC favored, so this is really strong. Gain ferocity based on your precision, and you get quite a lot of precision and therefore a lot of ferocity on power-based builds. That's just a very big damage increase. So I would say this trait is the worst. Those two can be quite good depending on the situation. This is the generally best one. Then you have Inscription, another trait that in my opinion is interesting, but no one uses it. Gain boons upon casting a glyph based on your attunement. The boons itself are okay. I mean, the best one is probably Protection. And you get all the time resistance, which is really good, but the glyphs are just typically not that great. Yes, you could make some builds that use glyphs, but typically then you don't use air. So it's really weird. This is a weird trait. I think this needs maybe a replacement somewhere else moved. I don't know. This is just a weird position where it is, and also a weird spot with the glyphs. So it's very, very underused, I would say. Then you have Raging Storm, very good trait. It grants you Fury when you critical strike a foe, and you can see the duration is actually quite long, and it has an 8-second ICD, and gain ferocity while under the effects of Fury, and that means you just get way more damage when you have Fury, so that's actually really cool. So in general, this is a nice interaction, and the cool part here about this trait is that it's also for allies. So if you have no boon duration, you can have 50% Fury upturn for your allies as well, which is really nice. It's just a DPS build, you can use that as well. And then you have Storm Soul. That's a really interesting trait that can be really good in competitive modes or PvE if the situation arises. Outgoing stun duration is increased. That's quite nice. More CC, more breakbar damage. and deal increased strike damage to disabled or defiant foes. That can be really good in fractals, in encounters where you have CC phases where you actually can CC the foe and have defiant foes, so quite often the case. But some bosses are not defiant, so if they are structures, this doesn't work. So for example, Conjured Amalgate is one of the bosses that comes to mind. So then this trait is not that good. But in general, as a power DPS build, you typically want to take this trait. But of course, if you are willing to drop it for a little bit more Fury uptime and some Ferocity, both of them can be fine. But of course, flat damage multipliers can obviously outscale the Ferocity. Keep that in mind. It depends a bit on the situation, but both of them are interesting. Then we get to the really big one. Bolt to the Heart, 20% more damage against foes that have less than 50% health. Really strong, power-based build, really, really good. Typically, you would not run it in competitive modes, only in World vs. World if you want to play some really crazy DPS, Zerg Weaver or something like that. But the other two traits are just too good to play in competitive modes to go for this one. But in PvE, this is a very, very common trait. If you want to be a DPS Elementalist, this is the choice. But Fresh Air is a really good one that is rivaling the other one. It gives you 250 Ferocity when you swap to air. And your recharge is reduced when you critically hit on air. So you can swap fire into air, then you swap into water, then you would normally have a 9-second cooldown or 8-second cooldown of air attunement. But if you crit again, you get instantly refreshed fresh air and can go back into air and get again this 250 Ferocity. It's really strong, really cool. It's a build defining trait. You can use that on Tempest, for example, if you spam the air overload for a lot of damage. It's a really fun interaction, really, really cool. And definitely very useful in competitive modes as well as in PvE, especially for example with air to get more super speed access, to proc the electric discharge all the time, to get into your air skills very frequently. It's very useful. And lastly, we have Lightning Rod. This is a trait that you would typically never use in PvE, but in competitive modes it's actually quite strong. Whenever you disable a foe without an ICD, you apply some damage and weakness. The weakness can be really annoying and the damage actually is really summing up over the course of time. So if you played it in PvP and have a lot of CC on an Elementalist, you can annoy the enemies. You have, so to say, weakness on them, which is a defensive and aggressive condition on them. And you apply some damage consistently with this as well. So it's actually really good, really underrated trait. And those two in competitive modes and those two probably in PvE. So air is really interesting trait line. Like I said, let me know your takes in the comments down below. By the way, if you enjoyed this video and want to see more of this, be sure to subscribe. And if you want to help out the channel, be sure to leave a like. But now let's talk about Earth. So the Earth trait line, obviously very defensive, but also somewhat condition favored. So strike damage taken is reduced by the Earth. That means 7% reduced damage from power damage. Then you get some barrier when you swap to Earth. That is really nice. That is just really, really fun. And it also applies some damage and cripple. So interesting trait. The radius is quite small, but still some barrier. And then Geomancer's Training, again, recharge reduction of Earth skills, 20%. And you get reduced damage from enemies that are in 360 range. So just less damage. It's good. On an Elementalist, this is somewhat squishy sometimes. Really good. If you go Earth, typically you're not that squishy, but still really good in general small traits again. Then you have Earth's Embrace. That's an interesting trait. 15-second ICD here in PvE and grants resistance after using a healing skill. You have some interesting healing skills. Sometimes you even have ammunition healing skills or short cooldown healing skills. And that can actually be quite high uptime already. That's more a competitive mode trait, I would say, because it's only for you. But in solo scenarios, you can also use that. Resistance is a very underrated condition, I would say. And I think this trait is actually quite fun to maybe craft some kind of build that uses that quite aggressively. Then you have Serrated Stones. Really strong in a conditioned build, always take that. Bleeding has increased duration and the damage is increased to bleeding foes. That's really good, 5% more damage and you just have longer bleeding duration, therefore in general like 20% more damage on bleeding. So really, really good trait there. Then you get the support trait here. Auras you grant to allies and yourself grant protection. Really, really strong. Protection, especially on Tempest, you can see here almost 40% incoming damage reduction to power damage. Really good. And if you share your auras frequently on a Tempest, on whatever build you're playing, this is really good. Even if you only use it for yourself, really strong. Then you have Strength of Stone, just again, condition damage trait, gain condition damage based on your toughness. 10% conversion, really good. If you're playing some kind of Trailblazer or Celestial, you get a lot of condition damage. If you play full Viper, you might not get that much, but still. Inflict Bleeding when you immobilize a foe. This will only happen to the same target every 3 seconds. So this is important in PvE. If you spam it on a boss and you get like immobilize, 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 it will only proc once every 3 seconds. So that's still a good trait, gives you some nice condition damage and also a little bit more bleeding. So overall, PvE typically, but you can also run it in aggressive Condi builds in competitive modes. Then you have Rock Solid. This trait is really good, but it's very skillful. So if you swap to Earth, you actually get this short 1 stack of stability, short lasting 1 stack of stability in a small radius to allies as well. So it can be really good if you use that for CC, and you can use that as a support elementalist in PvP, world versus world, even in PvE, and negate the CC. But if you do that in the wrong time, the duration runs out, if you get multiple CCs, or if you just are not in range, this can be really punishing if you use it at the wrong time. And this will also not trigger. This goes for all of those traits. This effect will not trigger when attuning to the same element. This is referring to Weaver, because Weaver can attune to Earth and then attune to Earth again, and then it procs twice. This does not happen then. You have to attune to a different element to make this work. But in general, good trait, especially in competitive modes. But in all game modes, because stability is really good. And then lastly, you have Earth and Blessing. This is a trait that is somewhat useful sometimes, but you don't always choose this. Decrease the duration of movement impairing conditions applied to you. That's really good in competitive modes, especially because of the chill, because chill really kills elementalists. And restore endurance when you receive one of those conditions. 10 endurance in PvE, that's actually quite a lot. That's a fifth of a dodge. So you get that quite frequently. If you play competitive modes, you get a lot of endurance therefore, and the duration is decreased. I would say that's more of a competitive mode trait, but it's a really cool, interesting idea, and is a lot of fun. But you have tough choices to make here. Then lastly, you have the very strong traits here. Diamond Skin, remove conditions from yourselves when you successfully combo a field with a leap finisher. This trait has a 1 second ICD, but you can remove a lot of conditions, as you can imagine. You have a lot of leap finishers. And you also have a lot of blast finisher, which not only cleanses conditions from you too, but also on your allies. So this is a really strong trait. Really, really good if you have a lot of finishers, especially if the combo fields are also there. And really good in all game modes. Typically you run it in PvP more than you run it in PvE, but still, even in PvE, it can be really, really strong, especially if you're healing Tempest or something like that, and you have a lot of blast finishers, can be really, really strong. Then you have Written in Stone. This is a very interesting trait. Your signets have actives and passives, but the passive get lost if you use the active. However, with this trait, it doesn't work like that. The passives will always remain. And you gain an aura when you use a signet skill. Those auras depend on the signet, so if it's a water signet, you get frost aura. If it's a air signet, you get shocking auras and stuff like that. It's a really strong trait, but only in competitive modes. You would typically not use that in PvE if you are in a group. If you're in a solo scenario, this is a really strong trait again. But in a group scenario, you would typically rather take the Condi cleanse for your allies. And in competitive modes, this trait is amazing. You cannot critically hit for a duration of time after entering or exiting Earth attunement. Really, really good. You get a lot of crit immunity, and this is really strong in competitive modes. So you can see those traits are really good in competitive modes. In PvE, I would say only the top 2 are actually somewhat interesting. Now let's go and talk about water. Water is of course the healing trait line, but also has some other good utility in there. So you and your nearby allies recover health while you are tuned to water. This is really interesting. This applies every 3 seconds and lingers around for 10 seconds. That's actually quite a decent heal passively that adds on top of your normal active heals as well as the passive regeneration. So it's a really good one. Then you heal your allies and yourself when you swap to water. Really good. Then your water skills, of course, decreased recharge, and your healing to others is increased by 20%. So that's actually a really potent healing modifier. It's only to allies, not to yourself, but still really good. Then you have Soothing Eyes. Gain regeneration and frost aura when you use a healing skill. This has a 15-second ICD, but you will see this is actually quite potent because you can actually get some frost aura, and that procs other traits that give you auras. For example, you can share it to allies, and for example with Earth, you can get some protection. So it's a really interesting synergy already. And if you have, like I already mentioned, short cooldown healing skills on Elementalist, then it's actually a really potent trait that you could choose. But it's really competitive, this trait line. Then you get damage multiplier here. Yes, water has some damage multipliers. Vulnerability inflict has increased duration. That's not that important, but deal increased strike damage to vulnerable foes, which in PvE would always be the case. And this damage is doubled while attuned to water. So you can actually get 20% damage multiplier if you are using a burst combo while in water. This was an old school trait that you used with Frostbow and Fiery Greatsword to get some really crazy burst. But nowadays this is not that useful anymore. But it's a really interesting concept to have a defensive trait line that gives you aggressive traits at a specific condition. I think that's cool. And then you have Stop, Drop and Roll. Really interesting trait again. When you dodge every 10 seconds, you remove burning and chill from you and nearby allies. It's actually a really potent trait. And I would say especially the chill removal is really strong because, like I said, chill is really annoying on Elementalist because you have so many cooldowns on your skills, because you have so many skills, and chill punishes you more therefore. I think in competitive modes that trait is amazing. In PvE it can be good if there's a Condi heavy fight, but typically you really would go for Soothing Ice, or if you have for whatever reason water attuned DPS Elementalist, you go for Piercing Shards. Then you have Soothing Disruption. That trait got a little bit of a rework recently. Always grants you regen when you use a cantrip, and depending on the cantrip that you use, you actually get different boons. They are actually all quite potent, and it's actually quite interesting design, but it's a PvP trait. You would never use that in PvE, I would say. And even in PvP, it's sadly not really that much use. Cleansing Valve, just really strong. Cleanser condition from you and nearby allies when you're attuned to water. Yeah, really good on all builds. If you're DPS build, bruiser, whatever, always Condi removes in competitive modes are really good. In PvE, it can be good on a healer, of course, as well. And yeah, just choose it probably most of the time. And then lastly, you have Flow Like Water. Again, a damage increase. You get a 5% damage increase. And while you have 50% or more health threshold, you actually get 10% on top of that. So water has again multiplier here, but they are somewhat niche in that regard again. But I would say those two together actually give you a big damage increase. So some builds actually used it in the past. Nowadays it's not always up, but still interesting. And then blocking or evading and attack heals you. In PvE, that's actually a decent heal. In competitive modes it's not that much, but it's definitely happens there more frequently. And I think it's a bruiser trait on a power bruiser. Maybe that can be worthwhile running at some point. But I think it's very interesting, and I think not a lot of builds choose that, sadly, but it's a really cool idea. And then lastly, we have Cleansing Water, really strong. Whenever you grant regen, and you can apply a lot of regen to yourself or allies, you cleanse a condition. Just really baseline, really straightforward, especially if you run staff, that can be really good, and you apply a lot of regen with auras, so really good. And then you have Powerful Aura. That's a powerful trait. Any aura you grant to yourself is granted to nearby allies. So you share your auras, for example, the healing one here, and this will be shared, and therefore you can proc all your other traits for the auras, like the protection, and it will also grant protection to allies. This is a key trait in all support elementalists and really strong. But there's another one that is also very good, Soothing Power. This is typically only run in PvE, but there it's really strong. You get more vitality, and if you use this, you also get a 100% effectiveness increase of your passive of the Soothing Myth. If you take this, you can see the healing is actually really strong, 300 per second, really good. And just a really potent trait if you're playing a healer. That's about it, PvE healer. And I think you can see water has interesting choices. Not all of them are always useful, but it's definitely a cool trait line. Now we go to the last trait line, which is Arcane. Arcane is the only trait line that is not following a specific element. It's so to say swapping what is the key focus here between the elements. So the first trait gives you boons, 1 boon. When you swap attunements, you get 1 stack of might. That's okay, not that crazy, but a little bit. And then this is way more important. Grant a boon to nearby allies when changing attunements. Again, changing of attunements is important. You also share that to allies. Might, okay, it's not bad. Regen, like I said, really good with water because it cleanses a condition if you have the trait. And swiftness, that's really good to move faster. And the protection is probably the best one here, especially in competitive modes. You get almost 100% uptime if you have some boon duration there. Really strong. And this is also why it's very strong in PvE, because you just get a lot of boons just passively from swapping attunements, which you anyway want to do. And then lastly, you have Elemental Enchantment. You get more concentration, therefore more boon duration, really good. And your attunement recharge is reduced by 15%. That is really good. That doesn't sound like that much, but it's really good to swap to your attunements more often, to proc your traits more often, to get access to your important skills more often. Really strong. And I think because of that alone is a very worthwhile thing to take for Arcane. And then let's talk about the selectable traits. So you have Arcane Precision. Your critical strikes have a chance to inflict a condition based on your attunement. 3-second ICD, 33% chance. It's not that good of a trait. It's an interesting idea, but it's not that good. The ICD really kills it. And I think it's different for each attunement. So if you swap into fire and get the burning proc and swap instantly into water, then you can get the water proc again, even though it has a 3-second ICD. But even then, it's not that good. The weakness probably is the most interesting one because they are just too short lasting or just not too potent. 1 stack of vulnerability, wow, that's not that crazy. So I think this needs maybe a little bit of help, but it's a trait, of course. If you want to play some aggressive Elementalist, definitely take that. A little bit more damage helps, but still not too much. Then you gain Vigor when you critical strike a foe. This is a really good trait in all game modes, but especially competitive modes, because Vigor grants you more endurance, therefore you can dodge more, and that's defensive. And then lastly, you have Arcane Restoration. This trait it sounds good on paper, but typically this one is just better in competitive modes. But if you already have crazy amount of vigor uptime, you could go for this. You get a little bit of healing swapping attunements. That's only for you, so it's never used support build. Yeah, can be good, but I think this needs a little bit more to make it useful. I don't know what, but I think this is just a little bit too weak. And then you have Arcane Resurrection. That's a fun trait. That means that your Geyser now partially revives downed allies. 7%. That also is for the staff skill Geyser in Water 3. But it's also when you press F on a target, you also cast the Geyser, while also granting you and your ally an aura depending on the attunement you're in when you start reviving an ally. That can be really strong, especially Shocking Aura in competitive modes, but in PvE obviously it can also be helpful just to get the resurrection more easily and get some heal for your allies as well and yourself. So I think that's a really cool trait and really fun design. And definitely useful in all game modes if you're playing some kind of support. But there are two other good traits here. So Elemental Lockdown is really strong if you have a lot of CC, because you get a lot of boons there, especially protection, and the fury can be really potent. So this is a really fun trait. So interesting trait design. We would never choose that topically in PvE, but it's a fun interaction and fun idea. And then lastly, you have Final Shielding. That is a really cool idea again that you also would typically only use in competitive modes. You cast lesser Arcane Shield when you use an elite skill. So whenever you use an elite skill, every 20 seconds you get a block for the next 3 attacks. And if that explodes after 3 attacks, that deals some nice damage. So it's a really cool idea. So you can actually double up, so to say, on the baseline Arcane Shield skill and just use your elite skill for getting that again. Quite interesting in competitive modes. Probably used there all the time over the other two. And then you have Evasive Arcana, one of the best traits in Elementalist traits altogether, I would say. It was way stronger in the past, but now it's still very good. Depending on the attunement you're in, when you're dodged in combat, you do an attack. And the attack that you do is typically the most important one is water or earth, but fire is also not that bad, gives some damage around you, while Blinding Flash gives some blind, obviously. But the best one is definitely water and earth. Why? Because the water one heals you and cleanses conditions from you and your allies. And the earth one does some damage, but it's also blast finisher. So if you use a dodge in a water field in combat, in earth, you get a blast finisher and heal. So for example, that's really, really important. Really, really good how those traits are. You can see it here. Really, really strong. And then you have Arcane Lightning. This is an interesting trait again, because arcane skills grant increased ferocity. Nice. 150 ferocity for 15 seconds and have an additional effect. Some of the additional effects are really bad, like just giving you some kind of blindness in PvE. That's just not worth it or not really good. But in competitive modes, especially the immobilize or even the stability on the shield can be really strong. So there are really cool interactions there. Not all of them are that good, but some of them are amazing, especially in competitive modes. So I think it's a fun trait, but you always have to see it. You drop the Evasive Arcana for that. In competitive modes, Evasive Arcana is amazing, and even in PvE it's really good. So Arcane Lightning is like competing against a really good trait. So you have to choose here. It's a tough choice. And lastly, you have Bountiful Power. That's a boring trait again. You deal increased strike damage for each boon you have. If you have like 11, 12 boons up, you can get a 24 damage multiplier. Yes, it's not that likely in PvE that to always have that, but if you do, that's a huge damage multiplier for Power Elementalist. This is one of the highest damage multipliers in the game. Really, really strong. If you really wanted to greed for damage and you have amazing boon supports, then this is the way to go do it. But in competitive modes, you would never take this. So this is the core traits. Like I said, let me know your thoughts about this and your ideas that you might come up with in the comments down below. I'm really interested in that. I think Elementalist has a really good coverage and really cool, interesting trait synergies. I think it is one of the better classes when it comes to how good the traits are, and some of them are used in specific situations all the time. There are not that many traits that are completely worthless. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to leave a like and subscribe for more content like this. Thanks a lot for watching. Thanks again to all my supporters, and I hope to see you all in the next video.